Welcome back to the Hey Alexa podcast, where curiosity is the currency of every conversation. Today's guest is someone whose work lives inside systems most people rarely think about until those systems break. Stephanie Forbes is a strategist, speaker, and author of the newly released book, Global Wealth, Local Impact: How Supply Chains Build Thriving Companies, Cultures, and Countries. Feel free to share the front page of that book real quick. I'd love to see it. Amazing. Look at that accomplishment. So, what stood out to me most in learning about Stephanie's work was the realization that invisible systems shape the way businesses, leaders, and people function every day. This conversation became so much more than operations or procurement, and it became a conversation about what holds people, organizations, and societies together and what causes them to fall apart. Welcome to the Hey Alexa podcast.
Thank you so much, Alexa. Really, really honored to be here. Super excited about this conversation. Can't wait to see where it goes. Yeah, let's get in. Let's dig into it.
Awesome. Me too. Let's start off. So, for someone listening right now who hears words like supply chain, procurement, governance, or value chains and immediately thinks, I have no darn idea what any of that actually means, myself included, how would you explain what you do and why it matters in a way that the average person would understand?
So in a nutshell, I solve problems. That's really as complicated as it gets. I solve problems in spaces and places that a lot of people don't really like to solve them, or they find them really complicated. But ultimately, it's just problem solving. I take, for example, a situation that might be, how do we get product from A to B, or how do we get a hold of a supplier that we can't get a hold of, or how do we solve a delivery issue, or any number of different things. But it actually just really comes down to some pretty basic problem solving and connecting with our fellow humans. Really is
Well
what I
done.
do. It doesn't sound. I know it's really actually when you condense it down, it's just two
Mhm.
things.
You're like, hey, I relate to that. I think a lot of people can relate to that because everything needs to be mulled over and examined from time to time. So you show up when things need fixing. Your work exists inside systems most people never think about until something goes wrong. But what first made you curious about the invisible infrastructure behind everyday life?
So I had a massive privilege when I was getting my real first job, right? Your first job where you actually get health and dental benefits. And in that job, I ended up on a project, a really big project, about $1 billion all told. So it was the Aurora projects. There's Aurora 1 and Aurora 2, and at the time they were built under Syncrude. And
Mm.
I had the opportunity to work on some extremely large, complicated mechanical and electrical packages. And one of the mechanical packages really started going sideways. And, it was a product we needed to get out of the US. It had real custom metallurgy, so metal components in it that were sourced from other places. There's a lot of intellectual property and other design constraints. And then there was also shipping it. Like a single pump was like 7 to 14 truckloads
Wow.
for one pump. When it was assembled, it's the size of a two-story house. And so this particular package, I had tons of problems on. I had issues with documentation. I had issues with the supplier getting back to us. I had issues internally with our own teams, and I had issues on the road. It didn't matter which portion of that package I had problems at every single level. And I learned really quickly, I'm really good at solving problems. So it'd be like, "Oh, hey, like, we don't have this. Okay, well, who has it? Let me go and find them. Let me go talk to them. Let me find out what their pinch point is. Then let me go to the next person and the next person." Because I just kept asking questions and kept removing roadblocks and, just seeking to understand. And so that slowly over time ended up, on larger and larger projects, ended up on more and more complicated things. And I realized that the system behind the system isn't just one thing. It's like a spider web of little things, and you gotta be careful what you pull on because it might cause something else down the road. So you gotta take the whole picture, and you gotta take it from a really holistic viewpoint of, like, how does this all work together? How does, pushing or pulling on one area impact another? And is that an outcome that I actually want? Right? So and I always like to use a little triangle kind of example, and it's, cost, quality, and schedule. So you got cost, you got quality, and you got schedule.
Mhm.
And you can have 2 of the 3, but you can never ever have all 3, right? Because you're always playing trade-offs. So if you want high quality and low cost, your schedule's gonna move out. If you want, Schedule's really important, quality is really important, well, your cost is going to go up. And so all of these trade-offs always occur. And so that's when you look at your system, you've got to start there. Obviously, there's probably other trade-offs as you move through time, but generally those are the three that drive the majority of our decisions.
Interesting. So taking on a very uncertain sort of atmosphere and being able to say, "Hey, despite the uncertainty, here's what we're gonna do."
100%.
Yeah.
I like uncertainty. I find it interesting, challenging.
Mhm.
And I realize that I'm rare. Not everyone likes uncertainty. A lot of people like
Mhm.
consistency, they like routine, and I think I like to spice it up just for fun, just to see what else is out there sometimes.
I think certainty is a bit of an illusion. That's just my
True.
personal take on it, and the more you get good with being uncomfortable, the less uncomfortable you feel.
Well, you don't necessarily feel less uncomfortable. My experience, because this whole book thing was like hugely
Yeah,
outside of my comfort zone,
extends the
and
brand
so
uncomfortability.
I got so, like, uncomfortable
Yep.
in so many situations, and it didn't mean that the
Mhm.
uncomfortableness went away. What it meant was I had better tools to navigate.
Mm,
So,
mhm,
I think what happens over time is we just recognize that we need to have different tools. It's not that the certainty, changes suddenly or somehow everything's, more clear. It's that's not the case. I've developed new tools for how I want to approach that uncertainty. But yeah, it's been really interesting to put myself in a deliberately uncomfortable space and then like how does that feel?
I like that. What have the global systems taught you then about human behavior?
We're very repetitive. Um, we do a lot of the same things over and over again. When you have and so as an example, when I write in the book about the East India Company, so this was
Mhm,
the first organization that was a corporation
mhm,
where they had share certificates where people owned portions of the company and it shared risk and liability across multiple shareholders. It also created insurance. And part of the problem with the East India Company is because they were dealing with so much money that power and greed were too tempting for too many people. And so you had systematic and widespread corruption and theft and a variety of other things, poor decision making that ultimately led to its demise. It led to legislation being passed in Britain to say, hey, you can't behave like this. Some of the first legislation. It ended up Britain ended up taking over portions of India
oh,
because that portion of land was ceded to the East India Company as part of a trade. So
mm,
you ended up in a really sort of dicey situation, and what we learned from that is, power and greed does continue to disrupt and corrupt absolutely. So when you have unmitigated power or unmitigated greed or lust for greed or the availability of a lot of cash, people go after it every single time. And so, when we look at some of the historical items, around I'm just picking on greed and corruption as 2 right now,
mhm,
those things continue to be pervasive throughout, society and as humans, like, it continues and is ongoing. But we can also look at more positive aspects, like the Silk Road and innovation.
mhm,
They were masters of innovation. They, figured out how to do letters of credit. They figured out how to do currency exchanges, quality control. There's a whole bunch of different things like that that really demonstrated the power of
mm,
innovation and that problem solving for collective good is also in there as well. It's just one of
mhm,
those important things to note that we do as humans we do have a very predictable nature. We are very innovative, but we also do succumb to, sort of that lust for power or, if there's too
mhm.
much money available, there's the opportunity to take it.
On the topic of succumbing then, what breaks first in a system under pressure, processes or people?
Oh, so the processes always break. People generally will work around processes. If the processes don't work for them, so it's a hindrance or an obstacle, people will go around. And so you see this actually really all the time in audits, right? Where people you go and you say,
Mhm,
"Hey, you didn't follow this process for doing this transaction." They're like, "Well, yeah, because it was broken. It didn't work. I had to go around to fix the problem and, help the customer or do this or do that." And so like it is in our nature to go around anytime that we see something that isn't working for how we need to solve a problem. That's part of our innovation. Like there is almost nothing in the world that will truly stop us if we're trying to like get to a goal or we
mhm.
have an objective, right? We climb mountains, we go underwater, we traverse oceans, we stick stuff in sea cans. Like we will
Nice.
solve that problem.
What did the disruptions of the past few years, from global supply chain breakdowns to economic uncertainty and rapid technological change, reveal to you about the way humans respond under pressure?
So two things. The most recent disruptions tell me that we became very comfortable with our global supply chain way of doing and being, and that we got very complacent and I'm going to use the word lazy
Mhm.
with how we decided to transact globally. And it was working for now, so we weren't really interested in taking a longer look at the resilience of it. Where are these things going? How many places and ports do they touch on their way here? And what happened is we all got caught and it no longer works. And the disruptions are not just these like random black swan events, they are all the time. They are continuing to increase with severity and frequency. You have very major constraints around your availability of boats, availability of planes, availability really of anything. And now we have some serious, impacts to fuel, whether that's regular gasoline or diesel. And that's gonna
Right.
impact, again, our ability to move things across the globe and within our own countries. So when we look at those things, what it tells me is that no one was like, "Hey, we should plan for a bad day case," It's like, "Oh, that won't happen, or if it does, we'll just deal with it at the time." Well, now we're dealing with it at the time, and it's like, "Oh, hey, we could use a lot of this infrastructure that we've been talking about for 20 years that we've never built. That would be really handy right about now." And so now it's
Mhm.
gonna take 5 to 10 years to build all the infrastructure that we should have been building over the last 20 years, and we're gonna have to play a little bit of catch up to get there. But what I also do honestly believe is that, again, you're gonna see a lot of innovation, right? Because we're gonna
Mhm.
build it, but we're gonna wanna build it cleaner, greener.
Right.
I wanna be more strategic about, the locations of it, who has access. So there's gonna be a lot of great innovation that comes with that, but, we do need to be more proactive about how we get our products to market, where we buy our products from, and what do those global tentacles look like in terms of reach and disruption, not just within our own countries, but across the larger economic scale and perspective.
Mhm. And whether we're playing catch up, as you were mentioning there, or if we're yielding the tools we already have set in place, what qualities actually matter most when everything becomes uncertain like that?
Oh, actually, on this one, I'm gonna pull a little bit out of my book. So on the Silk Road, they had a group that would be responsible for like kind of like disputes
Mhm.
um, in the conversaries. And so you'd have these sort of individuals that would be responsible for resolving disputes, and they were highly regarded because not only were they able to keep their word, but they were the ones that kind of decided how things sort of shook out on the Silk Road. That's what we're starting to see in the global scene sort of play out a little bit. So you see a lot of what we call middle powers. So countries like Great Britain, Australia, Canada, certain countries in Europe for sure. And so you'll notice that they're all talking. So you've got the middle powers all talking and saying, "Hey, like, how about this? Well, what do you think about that? I'd like to hear your perspective on, some of this reshifting." And so very similar to the Silk Road, you have, a bunch of individuals coming together to have quality conversations that really depend heavily on how much they can be trusted and how
Mhm.
much they can be respected and how mindful they are in terms of their conversations with these other middle powers. And that's really where I'm going to start to see more of a shift in terms of how do we navigate forward. It's hard with the majors, right? So when we think of like China, the US, Russia, it's very hard for them sometimes to navigate sort of this degree of uncertainty with, well, this is what we're going to go do because there is so much at stake. Oftentimes you can see middle powers navigate better with better outcomes than some of the major just because of inherently what's involved. When you're really, really, really big, there's much more complications to any sort of statement that you make versus a middle power where you have a lot more latitude because you're not one of the majors. And I think that's
Mhm.
some of the things that we're going to start to see play out. And I think those are the groups and conversations that are going to actually help us navigate through this level of uncertainty.
What would you say is the difference, or let's word this differently, the cost then between control and doubling down versus being adaptable in circumstances like that?
Ooh, the cost for control. That's a good question. So again, I think we're gonna come back to a comment that you made earlier. Control is an illusion. We don't actually have control. What we have in some cases are some great well-worded contracts to move goods to A or B,
Mhm,
but that's about it. We don't actually have control, and so what we have to rely on is, the ability for us to have an agreement be upheld by others,
mhm,
because a lot of those agreements are not being, honored, or they're being, swapped out for different agreements because
mhm,
the world's changed too much, and that it's no longer working. So the cost for control then becomes, um, it's not so much about money, but it's more about reputation and, being a trustworthy and responsible contractual
mhm,
relationship, whether that's between 2 nations, between different organizations, between, a supplier and a manufacturer, like, in all different levels. It really gets down to, how much do you believe in that relationship? And relationships,
mhm,
I think are kinda counterintuitive to the AI, endemic. Um, Relationships are really gonna be what helps us navigate a lot of these spaces and places forward, and I think that that's the more important piece when we talk about control isn't necessarily that we have any, it's about who can we trust, and
mhm.
who's responsible, and who can we rely on.
It feels like your work naturally sits at the intersection of all these things. So, relationships, parenthood, we spoke about that earlier,
Mhm.
mental health, leadership, identity, whether it's, unique to each individual or to a whole country at large. What invisible systems are shaping modern life that people rarely stop to think about?
So this is gonna be like at the government level, you have people that help direct policy.
Mhm,
So, for example, in Canada, we have different policies on interprovincial trade. We have policies on global trade. We have
mm,
policies on how we start projects, how we develop those projects. And a lot of those policies, as they relate to sort of legislation, can
mhm,
be really helpful in terms of getting business going and getting projects going. Others can be really onerous and drive a lot of unnecessary red tape. And
yeah,
so these invisible systems that you don't necessarily see because you gotta get right in the weeds of, like, how the government operates and what are the rules, which is, like, painfully boring, but really, really important because those invisible systems, decide how and who we trade with. They
mm,
decide how much is a tariff or a tax or a fee, which directly impacts your ability to be, say, profitable or not profitable, or ease of access. So when you're trying to develop a new product, do I have reasonable ease of access to the raw materials to make the new product? If I don't, how do I navigate that?
yeah,
And there are a lot of situations where certain rules and regulations, for example, on like pharmaceutical products that could be very
yeah,
dangerous to the public, those are important things, and we
yeah,
don't wanna get those wrong, but we have other things where, we have just, regular companies trying to put something together that's a value add for not just an organization, but for, whether it's your, local constituents, at the municipal level, maybe it's at the federal level. But, all of those things help drive the economy and help drive growth. And when we have too much red tape in terms of what those policies are, in terms of how we trade, how we get access to markets,
mm,
how we can sell into other markets, that is really problematic because one of my favorite, comments to date is
mhm,
is the GDP of nations is a direct KPI in terms of how good your supply chain is. If you have a great GDP, your supply chain's reasonably efficient as a country.
yep,
If your GDP sucks, you probably have barriers to entry, or you have a lot of red tape, or you have corruption on some level. So when we look at that and we're like, "Hey, our GDP is stagnant," what does that mean? So as Canadians, what does that mean? Well, it means that the ability to transact on a goods and services level across the country is not great. It means
yep,
that we have policies and rules and regulations that create unnecessary bureaucracy that weighs businesses down, that doesn't allow them to generate as much profit or growth as we would like. Like it's that simple. And so those are the hidden systems in there that I would have to say really need more attention. And the more people who understand and pay attention to some of those policies, I think the better off we would be as a nation.
I like that you brought that up because I think a lot of the time we get so split as voters with the left and right nonsense that we forget to really scrutinize the systems and how they're being handled. And you said it perfectly. And that is a clear reflection of our supply chain as well. Something for viewers to think about too when they're, I don't want to say place blame, but when they're looking to scrutinize and hopefully push their MPs to solve problems, that's a good place to start.
Yeah, it's about asking questions and being curious and saying like, explain to me why, or, help me understand,
Yeah.
this section. And I'm not politically aligned, but
Mhm.
making our representatives, doesn't matter who you vote for, but
Yep.
anyone, like your representatives accountable to you to say, hey, like I'm a small business or I'm a medium business or I'm just an individual, but I really care deeply about,
Right.
access to these things or to enable, my ability to move goods and services around. Maybe I'm into windows and doors. Maybe I'm, into lumber. Maybe I'm into mining and metals, like, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we all need to be able to have viable businesses. We need to be able to rely on our elected officials to help us, build strong, sustainable businesses that are good for everyone, right? They're good for the
Mhm.
economy, they're good for people, they're good for the environment. They're just, good for everybody and to move forward. And those things all can be true at the same time, right? We can have a thriving oil and gas industry across Canada. We can have thriving mining industries across the country. We can have thriving timber and related pulp and paper industries across the country, and they can still all do good things for the environment. They don't all have to be bad at the same time. We have a lot of environmental protection regulations that are some of the best in the world, as well as we've got amazing like reclamation programs and everything else, because the world and Canadians need a lot of these resources to get to what's next. And that looks like electrification. That looks like, more sustainable farming and food practices in the agricultural space so we can be more self-sufficient. Like all of those things require some resources for us to build. And we can do those things in a very appropriate way, but we also need the ability to get these projects off the ground. And that's going to require some maneuvering at the policy level. So regardless of who you vote for, those things still all need help.
100%. And they enrich us as a nation in so many other ways, even social programs, all the things we deeply care about. How did writing this book change the way you personally see the world?
That's a tough one. So I think this book really highlighted the fact that we are a little bit predictable as creatures, which I thought we were a little bit more like, hey, we're innovative. Like we are really innovative, but we're also really predictable. We move through pretty big cycles and those cycles are really driven by sort of rise and falls of primary powers and then just sort of the general push and pulls of trying to meet the needs of a populace while
Mhm.
trying to meet the needs of what you might need as a country, right? So making sure everyone stays fed might be different than taking over a neighboring, um, country, right? So to pick Rome as an example, right? Trying to balance, feeding the city of Rome and trying to take over, some neighboring land. Those are competing priorities because in some cases you can't do both. You can't feed an army and feed your population, and so, like, what's your trade-off? And so those types of trade-offs, do continue and I think are repetitive. I thought we would move out of that. I thought there was be some stuff that we actually move forward with as people that we'd be like, "Hey, we're smarter than that now. We can move away from this thing." But I did find a lot of it really cyclical and that we keep revisiting the same things, which was both kind of an aha moment and a, "Oh, that sucks."
Yeah, do you think that's a reflection of just collectively how not self-aware or aware we are of those trade-offs?
I think self-awareness is one part of it. I think the other part of it is human nature. We are, wired to behave a certain way, like, "Oh, I have to get more stuff so I can survive." Well, how much is enough stuff that you have for some
Mhm.
point in time? Do you have enough stuff that you're gonna be okay? Like, the amassing of unbelievable amounts of wealth for the purpose of just amassing it without any sort of, like, giving back or bringing society along with you is a little bit troubling. I think that, as when we get to a certain space and place, that altruism of like giving back and creating a legacy and trying to uplift, that doesn't appear to come one and then the other. There's different pieces there, and that's also pervasive throughout history. So that's unfortunate that we don't lift others up and bring others along as we move forward. And that seems to be human nature. It appears to be, and that's that whole nature versus nurture argument. But it appears to be, we're a little bit hardwired. I
Mhm.
think self-awareness is really helpful at the end of the day. I think that, making sure that leaders of our countries and of our organizations, making sure that we put people in those positions that do more than just look after shareholder value. They're also looking after, the broader picture of what does our role in society look like, and how are we contributing, improving the lives of others? Like, what are some other things that we could measure that would benefit the broader people? And not to say, we have to do all this, soft social stuff, but at the
Yep.
same time, I think that we need to take a look at what are our values? What are we driving towards? And if we're just driving towards shareholder value, it's I don't think sustainable in the long term, and I think it's gonna cause a lot of collateral damage that we're probably not prepared to deal with on the other side.
Mhm. It sounds like a resounding theme of a sense of curiosity
Mhm,
towards not just the self, the me, or our country, us against them. And it makes me think this conversation, it keeps bringing me back to this realization that these systems aren't only global or organizational, they're personal too. And we all live inside systems every single day in our relationships, in our homes, our workplaces, our communication, even the way we respond to stress. Would you
mhm.
say when you study resilience in systems at a global level, do you begin to notice similar patterns in people's everyday lives as well?
100%, 100%, you're bang on. You'll always have a friend, just sort of anyone, who's listening to this, or yourself, but just think about all your friends that you have.
Mhm.
And you're gonna probably be able to go, "Oh, yeah, if I had to, like, in 5 minutes, like, leave my house, she would be there, or he would be there, and they would have me packed up in, like, 13 minutes. I would be off to a safe space. I would have something to eat and, like, a water bottle or something," right? Like, they're that person that they can just show up and, like, do all those things. So that's a really high functioning person that, can really be very resilient and very adaptive. And so you have specific individuals, like a friend that you can think of that are that person, and then you can also have
Mhm.
organizations that are that people, or
Mhm.
functional teams within organizations that are like those people, and those are the models that as you're moving through and you're going, "How do I become more resilient?" Or, "How do I set up these things?" You can think of at least one person, I'm sure, that would fit that bill, and be like, "Oh, how do they do that? How do they, how do they just come up with those ideas?" And that's
Mhm.
where being curious again would be really helpful, and be like, "Hey, like, tell me how you got like this." Or, "How do you always know what the right answer is?" Or, "How do you always know what to do?" And they, might not be for everything, but, maybe they're you're just, like, get out of jail free kinda, like Monopoly game, kinda like get out of jail
Yeah.
free card. Give them a call and they help you out, sort you out, and away you go again. And so we do have a lot of organizations that are like that. Small and medium-sized enterprises generally, tend to be more nimble and quick, and
Mhm.
quite a bit more resilient than larger organizations. Larger organizations, I find that you have functional teams that develop those characteristics, where the larger organization itself is built on sort of stability and consistency. But you can find it. You can find it everywhere where we're trying to look. It just might not appear the same way that you think it should.
Mm. If somebody listening feels overwhelmed by the pace and complexity of modern life, what helps create resilience then, both in systems and in people?
Ooh, well, so this is what I do personally, because I could show you actually. I was gonna This is my to-do list today, right?
Yep.
Giant, crazy, like, how are you gonna get through that? So I go, "Okay, what are my top 3 things?" And
Yep.
it's just 1, 2, and 3. And so I'll go through and I'll write down 1, 2, and 3, and I don't look at anything else until 1, 2, and 3 are done. And then I'll add another 1, 2, 3. And then I just go through it in those principles. If I develop, like, something really big, like a month of stuff that I'm like, "Okay, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna map out all my things." Then I'll break it down at night. I'll go through, "Okay, tomorrow I'm gonna do these 3 things." And then that's
Mhm.
it. Once those 3 things are done, I'm done.
Mhm.
And then Tuesday, I get my next 3 things, and Wednesday, Thursday, etcetera. But I break it down into threes. And the other thing I have to tell myself is that you have permission after three to take a break, to stop. If that's
Yep.
sufficient for today, then you move, other stuff for tomorrow. Obviously, if there's certain things that are high priority, like there's a banking issue or there's something, you deal with that right away. But we often think that we got to power through like all these things in one day, right? We've got to like get everything done. And there are days that you have big days where you've got to get a bunch of stuff done, but the average day, you could probably make yourself a list, stick to your top 3. We get really overwhelmed when there is so much stuff and there isn't enough time.
Yep.
And then we just add more stuff to our plate and then it leads to paralysis, right? Because I don't even know how I can start. Right?
Yep.
And we start by just picking 3 things. Sometimes you pick the easiest 3 things, sometimes you pick the hardest 3 things. And I often find that when you get in and you do some research and figure out some of the details around something, it takes some of the mystery away, and then it can often reduce the level of, like, overwhelm or anxiety around something in particular because you've figured it out or
Yep.
you have a better understanding of it. And I think oftentimes we stop at understanding because it's too complicated, it's too big. But if we actually like took 5 minutes and tried to understand it, it wouldn't actually be that bad.
What would you say to people then who are like, Stephanie, I am not a list maker. I don't subscribe to systems. I think, because in my opinion, we all do, whether we're aware of it or not. It's just our systems all look different in our day to day life, right? Some of us have kids, some of us don't have kids. Some of us have a 9 to 5, some don't. So,
Mhm.
what would you say to those people?
So who knows? Maybe you leave yourself voice memos. Maybe you use the notes thing. Maybe you stick stuff in calendar. Everyone usually deploys something. Rarely have I met somebody who just keeps it all up in their head and they just extract it whenever they need to. Most individuals will use their phone or their laptop or something to make sure that they have themselves organized. And so then try to figure out what works best for you. Is it just one big thing a day? Is it, I block off this chunk in the morning to get all my emails done and this chunk in the afternoon to do my errands? Like it just depends on where you're at in your space and place. And
Mm.
then just really using the thing that works best for how you like to navigate. I'm a paper and pen person. I write it on the piece of paper because then I get my big pen and I go. And that
You're out of it. Yeah. Yeah.
that dopamine release of crossing something
Yeah.
off the list is like, that is my jam. And
Mhm.
so that's why I write a physical list is because I want that dopamine hit of crossing it off. Be conscious of what works for you and then use it to the best of your ability.
I think, and the most important factor that you touched on was getting it out of your brain, because what keeps you up at night is all the things stalling you out that keep
Right.
playing on repeat. Just
Mhm.
pick up a notepad and just like debank all that stuff. Get it out of your brain. I'm pretty sure there's a science behind this. I've heard it somewhere, but get those things out onto paper, get them tangible in front of you. Don't let them cycle around up here.
I keep a notepad and a pen beside my bed.
Yep.
When I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm like, "Oh my god," I just jot it down,
Yep.
and then I can go back to sleep.
I don't wanna kind of, the irony is it's repetitive. So, you said as a species, we've noticed resoundingly we're very repetitive in how we do things. I was
Mhm.
going to ask you, after years of studying systems, leadership, and global infrastructure, what have you learned about people? But instead, let's rephrase this and say, what will it hold us back from if we remain less curious? Or if we allow our curiosity to impose threats on our psychology as opposed to
Mhm.
curiosity towards, oh, that's what they're doing over there. How can we collaborate?
That's a very, very good question. So we as a species are repetitive, yes. We fall in the same cyclical patterns. We
Mhm.
are, however, very innovative and we can be very curious. And so one of the things that requires a shift, which I think we're going to get there anyway. Mother Nature has this really wonderful way of, like, disrupting everything all the time until eventually we figure it out. So whether that's gonna be, some more, flooding events or maybe a couple more natural disasters like a fire or a hurricane, she just, she kinda likes to, like, sort of make it seem a little bit more disruptive. We have a lot of man-made impacts right now, like the Strait of Hormuz isn't moving. We've got a lot of things that are our own, issues from a geopolitical perspective. But with all of this disruption, it forces us to be curious. It forces us to come up with other options. It forces us to think innovatively. If we are not pushed and challenged, we're just going to default back to our maximizing value. Right?
Yep.
We always default back to maximizing value. When we're pushed, okay, well, how do we work together? How do we connect? How do we collaborate? If I'm over, here, how do I work with you over there, Alexa? Like what are the things that you and I need to work on so that we can connect and trade and do all those types of things? And what are you most concerned about? And so now I need to be concerned and curious about what you find to be most important. And then you're going to probably ask me something similar about what do I find most important? And then we're going to collaborate and coordinate on our shared values and our shared goals. And depending on what your number one, what my number one are, maybe they're the same thing.
Yep.
Um, but in order to do that, we actually have to want to move the ball forward. And
Mhm.
because we have so much unbelievable disruption right now, everything from just regular commodities moving across boundaries, or whether that's the
Mm.
ocean, air, or by road or train or whatnot. We have so many disruptions there. And as that continues, we have to find new ways, new routes, new origin sources, new everything. And as that happens, that curiosity is going to become larger and greater and more profound. We're
Mhm.
already seeing quite a bit in Canada in terms of like, well, how do we navigate this? What do we need to build? Where are we going to build it to? Can we use this? Can we use that?
Mhm.
How quickly can we start, building this particular infrastructure project? What does that look like? We have everything from just a regular sort of pipeline, one of the old Keystone XLs, can we revitalize any of that? Hey, can
Mhm.
we expand the port at Churchill? Can we run stuff through Churchill? Can we, expand a port, in Vancouver area? Can we do something on the East Coast? What about Halifax? Is there something there that we can do? So you're seeing a lot of continued conversations that have probably been happening for a while, but they're now starting to really take shape and really move forward. And I that doesn't happen in isolation. That happens in
Mhm.
context with the other larger conversations that are going on.
Stephanie, what gives you hope about the future?
Ah, ah, maybe we don't laugh. Hope about the future. We have overcome a lot as humanity. Over millennia, we've overcome, the rise and fall of many empires, the rise and fall of different trade routes. We've survived pandemics. We've survived wars. We've survived everything, natural disasters. We will survive and continue to thrive in our next new environment. I just hope that we ask better questions and we hold people more accountable so that we can have better outcomes than where we're at right now.
And what do you hope listeners carry with them after this conversation?
That they really want to buy my book. No, just kidding.
That's a bonus, absolutely.
Oh, that's a bonus. That's a bonus, right? What do I hope they really carry with them? I hope that the listeners out there think, obviously, that supply chains are as fascinating as I think they are. All joking aside, I really hope that they take the opportunity to learn about systems and learn about, where things come from and where they go and how they are important within that system themselves, whether that's negotiating with your elected officials on what you think are important to you to help your businesses grow and thrive. It's about weighing in on what you need at a municipal level from your local governments to make sure that you can have access to, whether that's permits or, different business options. It's really making sure that you a, find it hopefully more interesting, and B, you find some renewed sort of sense of passion or purpose in how you're going to be successful in the years to come.
Well, you've definitely left me with a level of curiosity towards the systems that are guiding me that I may not even be aware of, but also the ones that I know I've implemented and have done well for me. So I really appreciate that. And not only your expertise, but the humanity that you're bringing into spaces that many people assume are purely operational and technical. I think this conversation reminded us that behind every system are people. Behind every disruption are human decisions, and behind every resilient organization are relationships, communication, and trust. So thank you so much for being here. And to everyone listening, thank you for spending this time with us. We're going to link everything you need to know about Stephanie in the show notes, including where you can buy her book. This has been the Hey Alexa podcast, where curiosity is the currency of every conversation.